Welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're really glad to have you here for Building Diversity in the Trades. My name is Caitlin Mivas. I'm the Director of Preservation at the Preservation League of New York State. Today's webinar is made possible by the Historic Preservation Education Foundation and the Peggy N. and Roger G. Gary Charitable Trust. If you've made your way to this webinar and are not familiar with the Preservation League, we are a nonprofit organization that empowers all New Yorkers to use historic preservation to enrich their communities, protect their heritage, and build a sustainable future. And we do that through grants, through advocacy at the local, state, and federal levels, technical assistance to all types of communities and property owners, collaboration with our preservation colleagues across the state, an annual preservation awards program, our 7 to Save Endangered Properties program, and virtual programs like this one. So today's virtual discussion is the final piece of a project funded by the Historic Preservation Education Foundation. Earlier this year, we released a video series called Trade Stories, where we shined a light on what a career in the preservation trades looks like and who the tradespeople are who do the physical work of repairing and restoring our historic structures. We featured the work of 3 individuals and businesses, one of whom is on today's panel this afternoon. You can find those trade stories videos on our YouTube channel, on our Instagram, or at preservenys.org/trades. But we undertook this project in part because of the results of a 2023 study commissioned by the League that showed that while preservation tradespeople generally have a high level of career satisfaction, many of our study participants also noted that the industry can be hostile to women, people of color, and anyone who identifies as LGBTQ+. We know that the trades are at a crisis point, and in order for them to thrive, we have to make this field a safe and welcoming space for everyone. So this afternoon, we've gathered a few experts who work in the trades or are engaged in trades training to hear their perspectives on how the trades can be more inclusive. Our panelists today are Lindsay Jones, owner of Blind Eye Restoration, a historic restoration contracting company based in Ohio; Maria Klemperer-Johnson, founder and executive director of Hammerstone School in Ithaca, New York, which empowers women and gender minorities through crafts trades education; Neela Wickremesinghe, director of restoration and preservation at Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York. And moderating today's panel is Milan Jordan, director of the National Trust for Historic Preservation's Hope Crew, a preservation trades training program for young adults. If you'd like to read the full bios for any of our panelists, we'll drop the link in the chat. I definitely encourage you to follow these folks on social media or follow their respective organizations and programs, because each of them are doing amazing and really impactful work. And with that, I will turn it over to our moderator, Milan.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Caitlin. Excited to be here today and to set the stage on our Building Diversity in the Trades panel discussion. And as Caitlin mentioned, my name is Milan Jordan. I'm the director of the Hope Crew program, which is a program of the National Trust for Historic Preservation that stands for Hands-On Preservation Experience. And we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary, March of last year, so we're on to 11 years of the program. And we've seen a lot of shifts in the landscape of trades training in the 10 years in which the program has existed. So I'll set the stage a little bit on this topic on trades training, on diversity in the trades, and then we'll hear from our panelists on the work that they're doing in this space as well. If you're not familiar with Hope Crew, it is the Trust's main trades training arm. So whereas the National Trust is a large national nonprofit working in the preservation space, we have a number of different continuing education, adult education, different learning platforms that the Trust does. The Hope Crew is the trades training arm, so we do the actual hands-on work working on historic sites around the country. The program was born 10 years ago by a woman named Monica Rhodes, and we always talk about trades training, if you're not familiar with the landscape, as often really becoming prominent during natural disasters, extreme weather events, anything that happens where unexpected increased loss of building happens. Usually deferred maintenance is a bit like a putting a Band-Aid on a hemorrhage, and you can delay the maintenance for a while, but then when something like a natural disaster happens and things are ripped out from under you, boats are in the side of buildings, you can't really keep putting the Band-Aid on. And then the shortage of trades training people, or the skilled labor that knows how to work on the buildings, is very presently felt in the community. We always talk about a quote from Lisa Sasser when we talk about the natural disasters. I'll read an excerpt of it. That a disaster such as Hurricane Hugo, which devastated Charleston in 1989, dramatically illustrates that conservation of the built environment is fundamentally dependent on the skill and availability of the men and women who do the actual physical work of preservation. In the weeks following the storm, the shortage of tradespeople with the knowledge and skills to repair the historic fabric of Charleston's older buildings quickly emerged as one of the greatest challenges of the rebuilding effort. So 10 years ago, when Hope Crew came into existence, and there are many trades training programs nationally, we're all trying to address the lack of skilled trades labor. And today we're talking specifically about diversity in the trades training as well, too, because while it's curious that there is a deep need for trades training, there are a lot of programs around the country. Some of them still continue to shutter and not exist despite the need. And there's some other diversity lenses as well, too, that we'll talk about. Hope Crew in particular, since we are a program of the National Trust, we partner with other programs and initiatives at the National Trust as well, too. We have our Where Women Made History campaign, and we also have our African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, through which we try to create training programs in which people can feel safe in the trades training and learning space. We've done one program to date with our Where Women Made History campaign, which was a majority women crew, all women led, out in Astoria, Oregon. And we've done many programs and initiatives with our Action Fund, trying to draw upon just sometimes the troubling landscape through which we exist in the country, and needing to create safe spaces for people to want to learn hands-on skills when there are a lot of different issues of trust and painful sites of memory as well, too. One last thing I'll say to contextualize this was a study that always stands out to me about women in construction, and they were talking about construction trades in general, so not just specifically preservation trades. But an excerpt from that study talks about, although underrepresented groups such as women represent a huge labor pool, they're not always welcomed into the construction industry. That was from a study in 2002. Regarding participation of women craft workers, a study conducted by the National Women's Law Center in 2012 indicated that the percentage of women in construction trades has remained almost the same from 1983 to 2010, which creates a major contrast between jobs in the construction industry and other industries regarding gender diversification. In fact, the percentage of women in many occupations that used to be more male-dominated have increased during the same period of time, from 1983 to 2010. Meanwhile, construction trades pay better than many traditional job opportunities, and they could be attractive to various industry participants if they felt that there was a better work environment, says this study. The study in 2002 discussed increasing female participation in construction craft occupations as one of the quickest solutions available to the industry to reduce its skilled workforce shortage. So, regards to diversity, I mean, we can't really afford to not have the trades become more diverse in any of the different lenses that we're talking about, whether that's gender minorities, ethnic minorities, different cultural considerations. We really need a really diverse workforce, because we need all hands on deck to continue working on the building stock that we have available historically. So that's just a little bit of information about trades and diversity in the trades, but I'm excited to pass it off to our panelists to hear about how they are actually moving the needle to help diversify the building trades. And we have Neela up first.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the Preservation League of New York State for making this possible and for giving us the opportunity to talk about diversifying the trades. And specifically, I'm here to talk about Bridge to Craft Careers, which is a workforce development program that we've been hosting at Greenwood Cemetery since 2018, but has existed since 2015. So in general, the whole program is turning 10 this year, which is great. And next year we'll be starting our second decade, which is wonderful. And I've been able to host almost 100 students coming through Greenwood. And it's been a really good example of how I'm trying my tiny little part to try to forcibly shake up the trades in the one little piece of the preservation world that I have some say in. And so through our program, we have young adults that are interested in preservation, interested in construction, looking to get a foot in the door in a trade and in a specific job that is very niche. And if you don't have background information about it, it can be hard to get your interests known. It can be hard to figure out if this is for you. And I've tried to create a cohort of students that is diverse, so not just for the good of the trades, but also for the good of the class. I think the more age diversity, ethnic diversity, and all kinds of diversity that I have, the better class I have. And I can see that through their outcomes. I can see that through how they teach each other. And it helps, like you said, kind of push the needle very, very small forward. But it has to be done. And I think that it's a small program in terms of preservation training, and definitely small comparison to Hold Crew and other training crews that are out there. But within the New York City area, I think it's probably the only one of its kind. And we have 2 program sites, one in Brooklyn where I teach at Greenwood Cemetery, and one in the Bronx at Woodlawn Cemetery. And the main thing that I'm trying to teach when it comes to my students is an introduction to preservation, but also general construction. I know that not everyone is going to make, the choice to get into the preservation trades, but my hope is whatever trade they choose, they're able to advocate for themselves and understand that a life in the trades or a life in construction or any of the related fields is possible, and just get a very wide breadth of knowledge into a small class, so that if they decide to go on to higher education or go on to a specific trade, they have the beginnings of how to figure out how to move forward.
So thanks to this organization for putting on this panel. I'm excited to be here and to share a little bit about myself. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and how I got into the work that I do, and then a little bit about the organization that I run, which is called Hammerstone School. I became a carpenter, or started working in the trades, in 2002. So that's a really long time ago now. After I had tried some other quote unquote more legitimate careers and realized that I didn't like sitting in front of a desk. I wanted to be using my body as well as my mind. So in 2002, I dropped out of graduate school and I got a job working in a cabinet shop. From there, I worked there for a few years, got a real strong grounding in finer woodworking and construction, and then went on to work for a local home builder. Along the way, I also learned how to timber frame, and I got into straw bale and natural building, straw bale and timber frame construction and other natural building techniques, and started my own small business, running my own contracting jobs in 2008, which was terrible timing. So I did end up going back to work for somebody else for a short while before I started Hammerstone. And the way Hammerstone arose was, in the 10 or so years that I had been working in the trades, there was a stretch of 6 months where there was another woman on the job site. For the rest of the time, it was just me and my small crew of all men. All of the delivery drivers were men. All of the subcontractors were men. Most of the designers who came on the job site were men. And after the crew that I worked on was very welcoming and supportive, and I never faced any outright bias or any really negative treatment that I had to deal with. But it did start to wear on me after a while. First of all, that I was always being recognized not for the work that I was doing, but for being unusual in this job. And that began to feel tiresome. And I also felt, and all of you probably know this, I felt this really strong pressure to prove my gender. So anything that I had to do perfectly. I couldn't walk into a lumber yard and look like I didn't know what I was doing. It really forced me to put on a little bit of a shell or a facade in everything that I was doing, and that was exhausting, and it made it hard to learn. In 2013, I started Hammerstone School. I had had the idea for several years, mostly because other women were reaching out to me and saying, this is really cool. How did you get into it? And how can I learn as well? But the impetus for us starting was that an acquaintance of mine wanted to build a tiny house, and she wanted to know where she should go to learn. And well, her first question was, can I do it? And her second question was, where should I go to learn? And I said, yes, of course you can do it. And don't go anyplace else to learn. This is my opportunity to start teaching classes. So 2013 was our first year of teaching classes. I organized a course around that tiny house construction. It went really well. So I organized a second course that same year, and that was really the start of what is now my full-time job. I have 3 other full-time people working with me and 1 part-time person. It has taken a long time to grow this organization. I grew it sort of deliberately, slowly, and organically. And for a lot of these past few years, I have been working in other jobs. So for a long time, I was working as a contractor. And then for 3 years, I was actually teaching at SUNY Delhi, which is a New York State public school trade school. I was teaching in their residential construction program. But during all of these years, I was still running classes through Hammerstone. Since 2021, Hammerstone, I was able to devote myself full time and bring in some other full time people to run Hammerstone. And just last year, we became a nonprofit, which I'm really excited about. I am not a preservationist. I don't come from a preservation background, and we are not teaching specific preservation skills. But I do come from my personal beliefs are and sort of the foundation that I build upon is always building really well and working as a craft builder. When I was working at SUNY Delhi, I saw a little bit of the other side of that coin, where we were training people to really just build quickly and as much as possible. I come from more of a craft focus. And one of the things that I care about really deeply is not just training women to take a role in this workforce, but I care really deeply about changing the workforce so that it is accommodating to women, and really, I think, just to humans in general. I think there's a lot that doesn't work in the construction industry right now that especially makes it hard for women to enter that workforce. And I want to see that shift. So I'm hoping we can talk about that in our discussion today. Hammerstone now runs classes year-round. Everything is workshop based. Our bread and butter class is a 2-day basic skills class where we teach folks the fundamentals of carpentry, starting from how to sharpen a carpenter's pencil through using a handsaw to using a circular saw, cutting lumber and cutting plywood, fastening things with hammers and nails. That's really our most popular class, and we offer it at least once a month throughout the year. We then still offer a whole series that covers all aspects of home construction while working on a tiny house. So it's standard construction, but we use the tiny house because it is small enough to finish in our courses and also portable, so we can build it on site and then it goes someplace else. In addition to those, we've been building our woodworking curriculum. We offer a lot of decorative woodworking classes, some basic furniture making classes, and we have one digital design class that we teach. We reach about 250 folks come through our door or take classes. Sometimes we have one student taking multiple classes. So I should say we fill 250 seats with some each year with some duplicates, many folks taking more than one class each year, but none of our classes are more than a week in length. So we're still really focused on workshop-based classes. We don't have a longer curriculum, although that's a goal or an ambition that I have to offer longer in-depth trainings. That's who I am in a nutshell and what Hammerstone does in a nutshell. So I will now pass it on to Lindsay.
All right, thank you, Maria. And thank you, Preservation League of New York State. I am very excited to be here. This is an amazing group of women to be asked to speak alongside with. And my background story comes from the beginnings of, I was the child of a guy who couldn't sit at a desk and started a home repair business with one of his kids being too old to go to daycare during the summer. So not having the income of being an engineer any longer, I ended up going to work with my dad when I was very young during the summers. I tell people I've been doing this for over 25 years, but probably have to also mention to a side that I was maybe 12 when that started. So it doesn't necessarily go on my resume, but I have legitimately been working on houses, fixing houses since childhood, with regular oversight, experience training. He taught me everything because he was doing everything, and my experience has always ranged then from, building foundations, putting on roofs, finish trim, painting, anything that had to be done. I ended up, we did a lot of work in a very affluent new build community while I was growing up, and I quickly saw that I did not care for working on drywall and plywood houses, even if they were McMansions. So I tried to become an artist, and I then thought about being an architect. And in one experience, after quickly trying to get out of undergrad, I was working for Habitat for Humanity, and a guy who was my unpaid intern one summer ended up being hired as my boss because he had a construction management degree. Not more experienced than me, he just had a construction management degree. So I also went back and got that. Still deciding I really didn't care for working in new construction, but in the process learned about historic preservation. And so I have way too much education for somebody in the trades seemingly, but I also have a master's degree in historic preservation from University of Oregon. And I was really lucky to be able to work on both coasts. I was given the chance to work in New York City before finding a better long-term position in San Francisco, where I was a project manager for historic projects, as well as essentially an apprentice to an objects conservator, because the company that I worked for did a lot of public art maintenance, and they had one conservator and nobody really else on staff to help. So between my project management, I was helping her do a lot of on-site work, detail touch-up. I was able to use a lot of my artistic background, my architectural background, my planning background, and it all really mushed together in kind of this fantastic thing that I was like, I wish more people would talk about how fantastic working in historical buildings is. But at the same time, I had this experience and I'm looking around for other jobs, and it almost seemed like this was pretty much it. I ended up moving back home to Ohio in 2016, and there, again, were no jobs like what I had. So I ended up working for a developer locally who was doing historic tax credits, and they had had some trouble with historic tax credit projects. In recent years, they had just started doing them, and the architect was very gung-ho about historic preservation and got them an A+ on their tax credits. And then they realized that they went way over budget, and literally the owner of the company sat me down and said, we do not need to get an A+. These windows can come out in 5 years. I need a C+ passing grade to get these tax credits. And then we'll do whatever after that. So that kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, but that architect was a fantastic connection. I met a lot of more local people. And then there was a project for that developer that I couldn't find anybody to work on. There were some steel and wood windows in a school building down in Southeast Ohio, where we were kind of out in the middle of Appalachia, basically. And there were companies, there were guys who could do things, but they were not on the scale that could do things for this entire building on the timeline that needed to be done. Or that was the larger issue. For the windows themselves, I had to search all the way to Detroit to find Jim Turner, who came down and said, yes, he would do it, but he wanted to take the windows out, which was decidedly not something the developer wanted. But in the course of talking to him, he said, it sounds like you really know what you're talking about. Like, you've done this before. Why don't you do it? Which was a little ballsy of him, but I also was kind of feeling that way. I was like, I can do so much of this stuff. So I simultaneously handed in my resignation and a bid for this project. And I had already been looking for people for months and months. So I knew nobody was going to beat that bid. And it was going to be enough money to get me started. So the Line Dye Restoration was born, and we're doing really well. We're going on almost 9 years. And currently we have 12 employees. We've had as many as 26 in the past. We've done larger development window projects. But we do more than windows as well. We work on all sorts of historic buildings, finishes. We won 2 state historic preservation awards last year, one of them for the cleaning and restoration of a monumental stained glass dome skylight at Ohio Wesleyan. And well, the overall project did, but that's the part we were in. And then there was another one downtown on High Street where we were involved in it for the bronze and art glass storefront restoration and decorative cornice painting inside, where we did historic color matching and glass matching. And we actually did some resin cast bronze mold making for the decorative pieces that were missing on the storefront. And this summer, we're going to be regilding the proscenium around the inside of the Southern Theater stage. And I'm really excited about that. It's going to be a really cool project. So we still have a lot of window restoration, door restoration, new window and storm fabrication happening in the shop. A lot of stuff, hands in almost maybe too many things, but it keeps everything exciting. And my crew is always growing and learning. And we've got a pretty happy crew of people over there. Workshops, not even too far. And my crew itself, I have about 75% representation, female or non-binary. We don't necessarily market ourselves as trying to hire only women, but we do market as woman-owned business, and it matters. Word of mouth, it gets around that we are woman-owned, that we are sensitive to gender roles and needs. And I've had crew members say, I have a friend who works in the trades for this other company, but they're having some issues and they're thinking about maybe coming here for an interview if you were hiring. And I'm always excited and welcome to those people. What I have found is in my hiring, there's really not a lot of people who have trades training to begin with. There are some guys who come to me who have been in the trades, but often we tend to try and hire artists or people who just have had some kind of labor or almost fast food, some kind of efficiency job where you have to work on time to get your job done because your hours are your budget. Because we find that there are 2 issues. The first one that we run into most specifically is that there actually are a lot of women and people in general who are really interested in doing the kind of work that we do. But the problem is the need for it's physical labor. It's not like you're always lifting heavy things, but you're always moving, and you have to move fast and you have to move efficient. And there's always kind of like a work, move, move, move. We've got fun music on in the background, but it is work. And if you are sensitive to that at all, and you're not super gung-ho about everything that you're doing, it can be there can be long days. And we also, like I said, the way we make money is we budget by the hour. And if things aren't going according to plan, there's no slowing down. There's only speeding up in order to make our money. And I'm not trying, I've never tried, like it has never even never come across my mind to try and like rip anybody off. I'm always just like, am I making enough money? Am I charging enough for this? And this year we've actually tried starting to add some profit into our billing, but the way that we have to bill, because preservation is so labor heavy, we just are automatically more expensive than new construction in a lot of cases. And so we tend to be kind of a boutique, non-essential thing for a lot of people who may mean well, but then they're like, do I get a cash break, or what if I'm a veteran or something? Like, it's already a cash price. I'm sorry, like we're already working on minimum budget, and so when I can pay people is not what they're used to being offered when they've got a master's degree and or any other kind of school debt or a family that they have to support. So I get a lot of young people, young artists who are not necessarily committed to the field yet. They have skills, they're interested, they have the freedom to travel. But it's still hard to keep people for more than a couple of years, unless they've really like decided that this is it and they want to move up into leadership. The other thing, I do work with local trades local preservation organizations to try and increase interest in the trades. The Heritage Ohio program, we've done lots of window workshops and heritage trade programs. And then Columbus Landmarks, we work with them currently in partnership with Columbus City Schools teaching at Fort Hays High School. And we have access to the masonry class and the carpentry class, 2 classes a year for 9 weeks at a time, spring and fall. And they come out and they work on one of the guard buildings. So Fort Hays is an old military base. And so they have a lot of little buildings that they kind of have mothballed. And so we're essentially helping to restore one of these small little buildings with the use of these classes and teaching them preservation trades, because ordinarily they only get to do new build stuff in their classroom. So this is an opportunity to touch pre-existing work. And even there, we get 1 or 2 girls every term, and that's it. And most of those girls, if they're really into it, they've still coming to me saying, oh, I'm doing this because it's good experience before I go to architecture school. And so it kind of feels like we're still not getting to them early enough. So even if we reach them later down the road, it sort of feels like I almost want to go into the elementary schools. Like I don't necessarily want to like worry about the lead safety stuff, but getting more young people understanding that you can work with your hands, you can have a good career, but you have to get started early. And it's not the same as an architecture or engineering degree. It's not going to be the same lifestyle, and you have to be good at it, and you have to be a craftsman if you really want to stay in it for a long time and not just like kill your body at it. But yeah, I find that women are actually fantastic workers. We love hiring women. They're so detail oriented and careful and positive to be around. They make the workplace just fantastic. So we're always in support of that, and I'm excited to be part of this conversation so that we can help grow more of that conversation, because I think it's definitely some place where we still need to grow and continue thinking about things, even as we see the growth of women in careers in other places grow. Definitely not seeing it as much as we could here. And hand it off again to the conversation.
We can get started with the conversation. That was Amazing hearing from all of you all. Such different paths that all lead to similar places. I hear similar hurdles and adversities, different hurdles and adversities, different ways that you all work. It's illuminating to hear about what happens locally on the ground. Hope Crew works kind of similarly, Lindsay, probably to how your model was described, in trying to add a preservation overlay onto trades training that was already existing from ground up construction. But you all talked about how your businesses came to be, how you came into trades and training people, and what that has looked like for you all recently. And the first question that always comes to my mind is about recruitment. Many of you touched on the kinds of people who land in your court and who you try to attract, but recruitment is always one that's a big piece of the conversation. I always think of the adage that you can't be what you don't see. So to Lindsay's point that you were ending on, that like sometimes even high school feels too late once people have already started to have some worldviews or thoughts on what they should do or where they want to go. I'm wondering what recruitment has looked like for you all, because as I mentioned in the opening as well too, a lot of programs, despite the need that there is for skilled craft labor, still go on to shutter. So I'd love to hear about how you all go about recruiting participants into your programs. And I'll just also send a cue to the audience. I see lots of conversation going on in the chat. If you do have a question that you want to field to the panelists, put that in the Q&A box that Caitlin mentioned in the opening, and I'll be going through and pulling those through as we continue through the conversation. But anyone who would like to speak on that, welcome any of your thoughts.
I'll
Go ahead, Neela.
Maria.
You go.
Okay, thanks. So I do recruit for a class every year. So I guess it's a little different because it's not a business model. I am here to teach, and I try, like I said, to get folks who can not only learn from what I have to teach them, and my crew can teach them, but also learn from each other. So I'm looking for a diversity of ages, gender representation, and everything in between. I think maybe echoing what Lindsay said, I'm looking for a real interest. It's hard to convince someone to do this or to learn about it if they really don't want to learn about it. And sometimes that's very hard. I'll be in an interview and say, like, what do you want to be? What are you interested in? And sometimes they're there because it's a good program or someone told them about it, but there is no general interest in the work, which is difficult. So I'm always looking for someone who, it doesn't matter if you don't have a background or if you never got the opportunity to learn how to work with tools, but a general interest and a wanting to learn is all I really care about. I love tall people. I'm not a tall person, so I really need them. It's good to have a mixtures of heights as well. That's helpful on site. But that's really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, and different ages, I think is really important. Last year, actually, we had because of a different funding stream, our cap was only 24. And it was a really different vibe in the group. And I think this year I was able to push up the age to 30. And so I have everywhere between 18 and 30. And that to me is really great because then you have different young adults that have had different experiences in their life and they can teach and learn from each other. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. And the recruitment process is long, right? I kind of start in drumming up stuff in October and November. And then by January, I'm hoping to start the interview process. And then we're working up on scaffolding by the end of March.
I'll jump in. Our model is a little bit different because everything is workshop based. So we are, and our classes run year round. So we are constantly looking for people to fill our classes. But I have a few stories to share about this. So the first one is the first year that we offered classes, I said, I'm going to teach carpentry classes to women around this tiny house construction. I was going to accept 8 students. I knew that this class was going to run on Saturdays for 6 weeks in a row. So I knew I was limiting myself just to the Ithaca area where people could, come to a day-long class and come the next week as well. And all I did was hang flyers in our local food co-op and it filled almost instantly. So, and I will say our classes are specifically for women and gender minorities. So, so it is just women and non-binary and trans folks in our classes. Although at that point, in 2013, it was just carpentry for women. It was not as specifically spelled out. So another story was that when we started our classes, I had multiple people come up to me and say, but why don't you allow men? You're cutting out half your demographic. And I said that we're not losing half our demographic. If we were just a carpentry class, we would not be getting the women showing up to our classes. Not all of the women come because it's carpentry for women. We asked that on a survey, like, was this class, did the fact that this was just for women matter to you? And plenty of people say no, but it was a nice bonus, or no, but I really enjoyed the atmosphere, or I didn't care that it was just for women, but I cared that it was taught by a woman. But we get a lot of women who wouldn't specifically chose our classes because they were for women only. And I have to explain this probably more to men who ask this question, but and especially men who want to participate or who say they want to participate. And they always say, oh, I'm the nicest guy in the world. And that can be absolutely true. But every time I have taught a class to mixed gender, I see a very different behavior among the women. In fact, I just taught a very short class in Cincinnati, actually, near you, Lindsay. And it was mostly women, but there were some men, and most of the men were attached to the women, partners, husbands. And I see a very different behavior in women when they're participating with men, which is they back up. If there's a quote unquote challenging task, they pull themselves out of it. And I think that has nothing to do with what the men are doing, but has more to do with a much greater cultural phenomenon, which is that we know there's this expectation that we're not supposed to be doing this, or that we aren't good, and we feel this pressure to be good, that we can't try and make a mistake because then we might be told, oh, you hammer like a girl, and that none of us want to hear that. So for me, it's been very important to protect that our classes are for women and gender minorities, so we can just get rid of that preconceived notion that exists in all. It is so ingrained, it's in all of our heads, that when there's a man in the room, suddenly we behave a little bit different. And that has helped our recruiting. I mean, the fact that we are this really special thing makes it something that that people seek out. Neela, I also appreciated what you said about age, and I didn't get into the trades until I thought I was really old. Now I look back and I'm like, oh, I was so young then. But I think I was 28 when I finally settled into what would become my career, working as a carpenter. And at that time, I wish that I had gotten into it earlier. But in my experience, a lot of the women coming to us are a little bit older. That's not universally true. We get a lot of younger people, but the majority of our participants are like in the 30 to 55 age range. I had a woman in my second year teaching. I think she was 50 then, and she came, and she had worked in mining. Like, she was tough. She had worked in male dominated fields. Like, she could hold her own. And she said to me, when I was 30, I wanted to be a carpenter, but I thought I was already too old, so I didn't do it. And then when I was 40, I was still like, oh, I want to be a carpenter. And I looked back at myself when I had been 30, and I realized I hadn't been too old when I was 30, but at 40, I was definitely too old to get into this. And now at 50, I look back at myself when I was 40, and I wish I had gotten into it then, but I didn't. And now I'm 50 and I'm definitely too old now. And I just wanted to say, no, haven't you learned? Like you're never too old to get into this. I agree with you, Lindsay, that yeah, we need more young people recognizing that this is a legitimate career path. And also, I think that like, just because people have gone to college and tried out some other things, they shouldn't be afraid to try something new when they're older. Everybody who works for me, didn't do it right out of high school. And I think that, that additional life experience and even like maybe a liberal arts education can really help us be better at the craft that we do. I struggled with this when I was teaching at a trade school where there was kind of pushback against teaching any type of reading or writing skills. I wanted these kids to be able to communicate well. And some folks on my team were like, they are here to learn the trades and not learn reading and writing. And that kind of pushback made me mad. First of all, these kids needed to communicate if they were going to run a construction crew. But I think that broader education can allow us to care about things that inform our work. Caring about the environment, caring about preservation, caring about other people, like all of those things are really important to being a good craftsperson and also being a good employee and working on a team well. So maybe older people are fine to recruit.
Yeah, I actually was going to say, Maria, so I think more young children and girls should be encouraged to work with their hands. But one of my best employees is she worked at a health insurance for a little while, but she was basically a stay-at-home mom her entire life. And I've tried to get her to become a lead, and she's like, that would make this jobby job feel more like worky work. Oh. But she's so good. She's so good at finishing. She follows all the instructions just like to the T. She has like this artistic side to her. She's like, I'm not an artist. Like, I've seen the stuff you do in your own free time. You go home from this job and you do work. And it's like a lot of it's like decorative arts finishes stuff, but it's around her house. So she doesn't feel like and I think so much of that is just like a mentally ingrained kind of thing where like you should come into this confident already. We shouldn't have to be building up the confidence in the workplace, which is sad. And we still aim to do it. I'm always like, I want to be on site. I have male leads, but I want to be on site as much as possible because when these new female employees are starting something new and just learning and training, it comes off very differently from me when I'm like, look, I can do this. I know I've been doing it for years and years and years, but you hold the hammer like this, you did, and like just things. And like, I don't need to be 6 foot tall, 250 pounds to get this window out. You learn how to do things differently. You figure out what works for you. You learn your pace. You work next to somebody who doesn't make you feel any kind of less than, and you'll learn that you aren't. And it's so hard to believe that so many people just from the get-go just don't see themselves ever working in this path because they just don't see themselves as a large masculine beating things up type of person, when in reality most of the work we do needs somebody with a really detailed, delicate touch. So yeah, I guess that's kind of, it's that balance. I would absolutely love to hire more people who are older and have more career experience. Like I said, I have way too much background in education. But I do think that that's helped me kind of get here as well. I'm working on kid number 2 and I'm 8 months pregnant, still working in the field. And I would tell anybody, like, you don't need an advanced degree. I'm going to make sure that my kids are both very clear from the get-go. Like, I mean, we're going to keep them out of the lead as much as possible, but they've got tools. They can work around the house. And that's my thing. But nobody's going to go to college right out of high school is my theory, you know, whatever, you see what they end up doing. But I do very much think that like an 18-year-old does not necessarily know what they're going to be doing for the rest of their life. And having some years of experience is going to help really frame more what their expertise and excitement about whatever field it is they're going into better. So yeah, if we can get more people in there, it's just, then that's the money side of the preservation trades thing, is if people are changing careers, then we have another conversation to be had.
Thank you all. I'll pepper in a question from the audience since we've been speaking a lot about gender, and I only have the four walls of what this question asks. It was specifically directed to Maria, but you've all spoken about working with women, and it asks, what are the impediments to women workers in your experience? So that's the only question. I don't know if they mean the impediments to them getting involved when they're on the site. And if it's an anonymous question as well, if you want to provide any more context. But and Maria, you discussed an example when you have had mixed gender environments, there were some impediments to women. I don't know if there's also finding the opportunities, but you could take this where you would. Have you noticed any impediments to women workers on the cruise or in the job site?
So when I first heard you ask that question before you gave it a little bit more context, my mind immediately went to what Lindsay was touching on, like our what some might see as our physical restrictions, which I always address by saying, of the men that I have worked with and for, I have worked with all body types, and they all have advantages and disadvantages. So I worked, my first boss as a carpenter was 6'4" and had a positive ape index, so his arm span was bigger than his height, and he could essentially take a sheet of plywood and like hoist it onto a roof without a ladder. And my boss in the cabinet shop was like very slight, and I wouldn't call him strong, you know, a few inches shorter than me. I've worked with big dudes, I've worked with little dudes, I've worked with strong dudes, I've worked with not strong dudes. And I think I think that, yes, there are general strength differences between the sexes, and we all can work to reach our maximum potential. So I might never be able to lift something as heavy as, you know, some 6'4", 250-pound guy who, does weight training. But I can, and I do work to build my own strength to its, to its greatest potential. So I'm always working to build my strength and also recognize that there are other ways to get the job done. And what I see as like really beautiful about women in the carpentry trades, which comes more from our upbringing and the cultural expectations and what we're forced to do, is we tend to communicate better and collaborate better. And those things can make us get a job done quicker and honestly safer. I have another story. I and Christina, who works with me, we were doing a window replacement job for this this couple, and the woman was home during the day while we were working. She had a home office, and we were actually working in her office some of the time. And she loved us. I overheard her talking on the phone, and she was like, I have this construction crew and they're women, and it's just so lovely. They're like quiet and they're respectful, which was definitely different from the experiences she had had with other crews, which is, once again, I don't want that to be a generalization, but that had been her experience. And we brought this different vibe to the job site. And we did this job. It wasn't like particularly heavy, but we had to lift windows up ladders and then a lot of trim work. And at the end of the job, after we had successfully finished, and she was happy with our work, she said to me, do you only hire women? And if so, how do you do the heavy work? Because you're not as strong as men. Or she specifically said, we don't have the same upper body strength as men. And I was just flabbergasted because we had just finished the job. We had just done it. and she had been really happy and she had seen us doing it. And yet she was still stuck in her mind, first of all, that because that we have less upper body strength. And because she had been told that, I don't think she ever worked to build her upper body strength. So she was sort of thinking for herself, like, I don't have this. She's never worked on it. She sort of was told that and believed it, which I sort of took the opposite tack, which was to build my upper body strength. Now it's different. It's different from a man's upper body strength, but I always like tried to build that to my greatest ability. But just the fact that she thought we couldn't after we had done that work was really hard for me, because I was like, if we can't demonstrate this to people when we've just done the work, like, how are we gonna make any progress getting people to hire us if they think that we're incapable of the work? So I guess I didn't really answer the question, because that's, I don't see that as an impediment. I think that's what other people think of as an impediment, and I don't think of it as an impediment. For me, okay, so this is what I think of as the greatest impediment to hiring women, and it has nothing to do with women. It has to do with culturally what we expect of these careers. If you're a woman and plan to have a family, and you go and work in another, like, historically non-traditional trade, but one of those ones that in your diagram, Milan, you showed earlier, where they have included a lot more women in the trades, you can expect to have maternity leave and HR departments that allow you family time. And for me, one of the struggles with the trades is that there's still an expectation that we work hours and we work in a way that is incompatible with having a family, at least in the way that culturally we still tend to make families work. So culturally, we still put a lot of that work of raising children on women. Now, if as a culture we were able to balance out that work, I think that this would no longer be an obstacle in the trades. But because we still expect women to be the ones who, just pregnancy and like infancy and maybe breastfeeding aside, which, Lindsay, I also worked through most of my pregnancies as well. But with all of those things aside, like once your kid gets into school, women are still expected to be there for the drop off and the pickup, and be the one who leaves the job when the kid gets sick to pick them up. And I have another example of how the trades treat this. We had a presentation at one of our classes from the trades union, and there were two people. There was a man who was in charge of recruiting and a woman who was part of the Sisters in the Brotherhood. And I thought, this is great. Like, we're going to show sort of the welcoming attitude of the unions to women getting into the work. And one of the women in my class, she said, they were talking about how the hours were from 7 to 3 or something like that. And the woman in the class said, this sounds really cool and I'd love to do it, but I have to drop my kid off at school at 9 or even at 8:30. Are there ways to make that work? And the representative of Sisters in the Brotherhood said, well, we can't expect special treatment. And I think that attitude is really pervasive, because this woman isn't expecting special treatment. It's just that because she's the mom and our culture expects her to do the drop off and not the dads. If the dads were expected to do the drop off just as much, then it wouldn't be seen as special treatment. So for me, I see this impediment to having women with families work with me. I've worked with lots of women. I've been in construction environments with lots of women, and I often look around and I say, I am the only one here with a family or with a young family. And it is really hard as a woman being expected to do all, the majority of the childcare, the majority of the drop-off work, to work in this industry. And I see that as a failing of the industry and our culture as a whole, and not as a failing of women. That was very long-winded and
It's
not
okay. Thank you, Maria.
Doesn't-
Neela, I
doesn't
saw you
really
come
answer
off
the
a couple of times. Did you want to add something? Lots of questions coming in from the audience, so I'll keep those coming after you have a chance to share, Neela.
Sure. I think I'll also, there was something in the chat that I think kind of dovetails really nicely. For me, I think the question in the chat, it says, for those of you who work with cis men, do you feel that in any ways they leave their time with you more prepared to go back into the field, either having explored any of their biases or just in generally more open-minded, more informed, more prepared to be a decent person on the job? That's my greatest hope. I kind of try to address the young men in my program and say, I hope that you can be our best advocate, not because of anything else, but now you, for better or worse, you have been taught the things that I've taught you by a young-ish queer woman of color. So I hope that that stays with them so that when they move on, they understand that there is nothing different about having women on a job site. And the best thing that happened is I had a student, Mike, a couple of years ago, and he got accepted into Local 1 BAC, Bricklayers and Allied Crafts. And he said, he called me up on the phone and he's like, I hate these guys. They're so disrespectful. I can't, this is ridiculous. And I was like, that's great. To me, it's having a young white cis men tell me, wow, these older guys are treating each other like babies. That's what I want. I don't want that for him, but I want the reaction to be, this is not what a professional grown-up does at work. And I think having young men in my class is wonderful because then they know, like, this is not how we act at work. And I demand a safe and equitable workplace for all my students. And I think to maybe address the first question, when I have women, gender nonconforming folks, trans students, queer people in my class, it is the only time that I can control an otherwise uncontrollable thing in their lives. And it is my only hope that during the time that I have them in my class, that I can make it as safe, as enjoyable, and as equitable as possible, because I know for a fact that it won't be that after they go out into the world. And I wish it was different. That's the part that really is difficult because some of my most engaged students would have a really great fit within the trades if the trades were open and the union trades were open for them. Because the union trades allows for a competitive wage, benefits, everything we want for a young adult. And it's kind of like they want a union path, but the union path doesn't see them as their next apprentice. And I think that is to the detriment of the trades, of the organized trades. And I think I would so badly want to have serious conversations with the trade unions, because my best students are not going to be treated the best by a union, even though it's where they'll get paid the most, they'll get the best training, and they'll know about how to work safely on a job site. And I think it is changing little by little. I will never stop advocating for queer people in the trades. And it will, I guess, for me, I'm going to keep pushing my students to apply, and soon they will, I hope, understand that, if they're getting very skilled students from me, they're going to have to start opening up their doors and being open in their minds to creating space for queer people and women in the trades. And it's kind of like, I'm also a big baseball fan. So I think that for me, like, there are all types of bodies in baseball and everyone has a different role and everyone can do everything. And to me, that's kind of like working in construction. We all have to work together. And it's always a game of inches. And I think that we need to, everyone is figuring out the role that they're going to play on the construction team. And I really am waiting for like the awakening, the queer awakening of the unionized trades, because there are so many people that are looking towards a better work-life balance, towards being able to get out a little bit earlier so they can actually pick up that kid from work, who've already created a different idea of what a family might look like for themselves. And this fits very well into what they think their future might be. So it's going to happen. It is glacial at times, but I will keep pushing it. And I think that, Lindsay, like you said, like it has to do with representation. You know, I'm never going to stop doing this. So I hope like more and more queer students just keep applying, because that's just what it's going to be, for me. But there are, it's very heartbreaking to have to always, for myself, I mean, you know, you can never not be charming. It's so exhausting, to try to capture hearts and minds of the people who are in charge of letting students into different apprentice programs, even seeing applications. I can never be angry, and always try to be understanding, especially for people in leadership, who have a lot of power when it comes to who they let in, to different trades and different apprenticeship programs. And in New York, I think it's different because it's a good, you know, environment to be part of the organized trades, but they're still so far behind from other jobs in general. But hopefully it'll kind of push forward year by year.
Lindsay, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I guess I try to be quick. Yeah, pregnancy, I think, is probably what I found to be absolutely the largest limiter. On one hand, there's actual maternity leave, which I've had in my circles of just knowing pregnant women, not even having to do with the trades. There are so many women who are drawn to just staying home after they give birth, and there's a concern in the workplaces that giving women maternity leave means you're giving them unpaid or giving them paid work leave time, and then they may not even come back. And that has just become so pervasive because, like, I know there are people out there who have those thoughts, but it's not everyone. And the bigger problem is that more often than not, the actual pregnancy is a complication in itself. And I'm the boss, so I can kind of take a breather here and there, but it's really hard if you're a working crew member who his entire livelihood is based on your physical body. I will say that also Maria kind of mentioned like these big guys who have the ability to lift these huge amounts of weight and throw things up on roofs and blah, blah, blah. They're also the first ones to throw their back out. So every single one of the men on my crew all have back problems. Every single one of them. We cannot lift anything in the shop with a man. It's always a team group lift with multiple women because the guys can't do it. But we've gotten really lucky. Again, I do think it's another matter of representation matters. My wellness manager, it's a balance of HR, safety, and he also works in the wood shop a lot of the time when we need people trained. He's a gay man, white. And he often, whenever I say anything about my pregnancy, he's just like, oh God, women don't get enough credit. Oh God, I can never do that. Oh God. then you have to birth the baby. Oh God. And he's stressed to the hilt thinking that I'm going to be out till August because of daycare issues, and not having actual childcare, which even as the boss can't help that. I still have to do drop off in the morning. My husband is super supportive. He's also in the trades. He's an arborist, and he has a much more flexible job than he used to. I kind of pushed that one a bit when we found out we were having our first, because there's like, I can't do everything. And he was in a position where you just work until you're done at the end of the day. There's no promise when you'll be home for dinner. And that's just, they literally have an environment of all of the wives just know to just be accepting of whenever they want to get home. And it's not necessarily the guy's fault. Like there's a lot of them that move in and out of the trade. He's an arborist because of that, because their family needs them and they can't stick to that kind of lifestyle. But then they offer them more money. There's always overtime. There's da-da-da. So thankfully he heard me and he moved into a much more flexible position, but he still has to be up and out at 5:30 in the morning, which means I can't travel. I can't go out of town for work because I have to be the one to take the kid to daycare in the morning. There's no one else to do that. And so that's huge. And I can only imagine like people who have more long-term issues. So we have our, yes, I have kids. That's going to be a long-term thing, obviously. But at the same time, we have employees with long-term health issues. We have employees, for the first time, I have my first autistic employee, and that has been a learning curve. But one of the hardest working, most enthusiastic people I've ever hired. So it's been a different challenge, but I think just being female shouldn't feel like an impediment. As long as you have a supportive environment and workplace, which in that case, we shouldn't be focusing on the women as much and focusing more on the environments, like Neela was saying with the unions. They just don't have the kind of mindset to support what it is we need or what families need in general. They're used to working their guys until they're rolling over in their grave, basically. And you can't do that to both sides of the family. So there's always going to be a balance, and it just seems that the females take it more often. So hopefully the business world figures that out.
Can I just add one more comment? I do find it so ironic that the unions that were created to support the worker and protect the worker are now the institutions that make it really hard for certain sectors of the workforce to come and help them do the job. And I still can't quite wrap my head around it and the why of it, but it's always frustrating to me. And here in Ithaca, where it's like really small, there's not a ton of work, it's really provincial. Our unions are very different. I was just talking to an electrician who was in the New York City unions, a woman electrician, and she was like, oh, it's just such a different scene there. There's just so many more people and so much more work that it's a lot more equitable than here, where it's still, I believe our unions are pretty backwards still in a lot of these issues.
That is an interesting point that you raised, Maria. And a whole conversation that we could go into about the Kool-Aid that has been drunk. There's a question, I hope to get to all the questions. There's one from Marissa as well, too, that I've been looking at. And her question was, could you speak to the opportunities and challenges of recruiting non-college educated or immigrants to the historic preservation trades? It seems that most of the participants in these programs / firms have advanced education and are perhaps upwardly mobile. And she'd like to hear about some other recruitments and if there have been challenges around that.
I think for us, it's really split. We have folks that are right out of high school. We have folks that are English as a second language. I've had students that are new Americans. I also work with some high schools in Brooklyn that are specifically geared towards new Americans, which is really important. Even if it's just making sure that the high school knows that this is a program that they can look at. Hold on a second. Hey, I'm still here.
All right, no worries, I just wanted to tell you, I was going to lock up a little.
Don't lock me in. Okay.
All right, okay.
Sorry about that. So even if the students that I present to, they aren't yet ready for a more a workforce readiness program, maybe, the juniors that I talk to will be ready in 2 years. Maybe their brother or sister or sibling at home can be made ready for it. So I get into high schools and talk about the program as much as I can. And a lot of the communities that we serve at Greenwood, so Greenwood Cemetery is an enormous green space, as well as cemetery in South Brooklyn. We're almost 500 acres. We have a lot of different neighborhoods that we're around, and they're extremely diverse. So I try to get into as many high schools as I can to describe what it is to be in the trades as a profession, not as an afterthought. And I think that I also work with different preservation professionals to do these kind of presentations. So I also think that it's important to kind of, it's like exposure therapy, like, yeah, this is something you can do. And I do a lot of lectures just for people who are interested in Greenwood, interested in the cemetery as a green space, that this is also a community space that you can get job training, which a lot of people don't think of cemeteries in that way. And I saw another question in the chat about, how to start preservation trades and things like that. Reach out to your local historic cemetery, see what they got going on. It's a great place to kind of see where you can make a small impact, see who's in charge, get them in touch with me. World Monuments Fund is our partner in the Bridge to Craft Careers program, and this was really their brainchild. So imagine all the historic cemeteries that we have all throughout the United States, if they could be infused with a workforce training, to not just make the cemeteries look good, but also to bolster the communities around there. So it's something to think about. But I also, being able to understand Spanish is really important in the construction world. Making sure, I work with a lot of folks that are bilingual, which is really important for younger people to feel comfortable. So all of those things we've tried to make sure that we get different types of folks into this program. They're definitely not everyone has college, not everyone has grad school. We get both. Yeah.
I've got, sorry, I thought of like this because I was meeting with a friend today who is an HR specialist, and she was actually writing resumes for a new job position, and she was kind of working over the wording of one of the things. And she said, I reached my goal of like 70% of applicants met over 60% of the job requirements based on where I placed the job ads and the specific recommendations I put in the job postings. And she went into it a little bit because I was kind of like, I didn't understand it at first until she explained the second part. And it was really, again, it was another like representation matters, like where you put the job posting matters. The schools that Neela is reaching out to matters. The school that I'm trying to reach out to matters. It's a local public school. There's definitely more like community groups that I know I could reach out to. There's more preservation groups that I could reach out to. I said, like, I don't find a lot of people with this preservation experience. In reality, I don't find a lot of people who live locally who can jump on the job quickly. I could probably put my job postings more on like the larger national job posting boards for preservation, blah, blah, blah. And I could find lots of interested participants who would then have to think about whether or not they wanted to move to Columbus, Ohio. So there's definitely a lot to be done with that. Who are you actually reaching out to and saying, hey, do you want a job? And not just putting it on your average job board or just a preservation board or just the local college board. I think that's going to be one of the biggest things, is just actually making sure that people see that you are hiring and you are hiring from people in their demographic.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot more targeted outreach because, again, somebody would have to even know to be looking for that type of opportunity in order to find it. There's an interesting question in the Q&A about how you first overcame and learned from your mistakes when you were first starting out in the field, especially when your work is highly visible. Is anything that you can think back up on that was what felt like a blunder at the time, and how you overcame that, got your confidence back, especially with highly visible work?
I mean, the best and worst thing about working at Greenwood is I can never like truly escape all my repairs. Like before I was working for a private company, I'd go from one place to the next, and they were very high profile projects, but after the scaffold came down, I didn't go back up. But here I'm constantly revisiting repairs just because I'm driving by, I'm going here, the cemetery is big, but I am always reminded of things that did not work out because of the nature of what I work on is monuments that are left out in the rain, right? These are exterior monuments meant to be outside. I can't just put a little glass bubble over everything. So I'm constantly monitoring my repairs over time, for better or worse. And I think overcoming it is just kind of just saying, oh, like that didn't work out, let's try something else. And I think documentation is really key. That's part of my three non-negotiables: documentation, reversibility when we can, and craft, right? So making sure that we are always following good photography protocols, taking pictures all the time, making sure that our repairs are reversible when we can, and making them as good as we can, as beautiful as we can, so that they fit in with the type of monument and the type of repair that we're doing. But I think just being honest, like if I do something and it didn't work out, I can say, well, that didn't really work out. Let's try it again. Just also being okay when other people in my crew or students, mistakes are going to happen and they're part of it. And sometimes it's like, oh, I wish that didn't happen, but we have to break a couple eggs along the way. And that's what happens. But I say that we're going to make sure that we can mitigate any of the very small mistakes that we make along the way when we teach and learn. And we'll make sure that they can still look good. But I think just being very honest and saying, well, that didn't work. This might be why, and we'll try another way. And I think being open to figuring out new and interesting ways to do a thoughtful repair is really important. And that's really the best thing about working on historic buildings. It's almost never the same thing twice. We're always trying to think out of the box to figure out, how am I going to get here or there? And then working in the cemetery, access is always a big deal for us. I can't really get big equipment in some places. So we're always trying to think outside the box, use trees as my height and different things like that. Our arborists do a lot of work with us to make our jobs easier. But I think just being really upfront that mistakes happen, it's always be collaborative, and then be open to trying to like jostling everyone's brain, because someone's going to have a really good idea that you didn't think of, and it's going to like solve the problem. And usually someone's going to think about something that's like also very dangerous, but might work. And don't pick that one. There's always a safer way to do it. And it's also okay to get it as close to great as you can, as long as it was better than it was yesterday. So that's something that I have to keep in mind, that perfection can't get in the way of progress, even though we all know that it can be perfect. Sometimes because of our restrictions, it can't be. So can get as close as we can, and then that's okay.
I really like this question because it's something that I I talk about explicitly in our classes. And one of the things that I love about being a carpenter, because it expands into life in general. A good carpenter, in my mind, is not someone who does something perfectly all the time. A good carpenter is one who can fix their mistakes, who knows how to fix their mistakes. And you don't get good at fixing mistakes by sitting around and theorizing about what a possible mistake would be and how you might possibly fix it. You learn how to get good at fixing mistakes by making mistakes and fixing them, and being in that position where you have to come up with a fix. Now, I try not to make mistakes, and I try to impress upon people that we're always trying to not make mistakes, but when they happen, then we have the opportunity to find a creative and elegant solution. And I can think of a few like kind of glaring mistakes that I've made, like pretty big visible mistakes. And I'm actually really proud of the solutions I came up with to fix them. And what I do in my classes is model that, I will either inadvertently make a little mistake, maybe a big mistake in class, or someone will have made a mistake that I then model how I go about coming up with the fix. And one of the things that I like to model, because I've gotten much better at it over time, is I give myself a little bit of time to be mad, but not too much time. Like I no longer have to throw something across the room. I give myself a second, I get frustrated, and then I immediately move into what is the fix. And I talk through that as I'm fixing it. And I solicit, like you do, Neela, I solicit suggestions from people, and I take in a lot of information. And because I've made lots of mistakes over time, I have this catalog of like, oh, this is kind of like that, and I could do this, or this is kind of like that, and I can do that. that carries over into all aspects of life, and it makes it a lot easier to jump into things without what one of my TAs called analysis paralysis, where you're so worried about doing everything perfectly that you never get started. So I talk about it and I try to model it. And one other thing that I have been conscious about deciding to do is modeling mistake making, not intentionally, but not trying to hide it, modeling it in mixed company, like mixed gender company, because I think when we still face this thing that if you do something wrong as a woman or a non-traditional trades person, you will get looked at and labeled. And yet I go into the lumberyard and there are dudes who walk up to the counter and they're like, oh, I screwed this up and now I need to buy all this extra material. Like there's no, they don't feel like they have to hide it. And I realized that if I'm feeling like I have to hide it, then we're still sort of modeling this idea that we have to be perfect. And so I've been more conscious about when I do screw something up, like just being honest about I screwed it up and now I'm taking the steps to fix it and I know how to fix it. Or I will figure out how to fix it, hopefully.
And then with that, I will jump in because sadly we are reaching the end of our time here for the webinar. But I want to thank Milan. Thank you so much for guiding the conversation. Lindsay, Neela, Maria, thank you so much for sharing your deep wisdom and experience with everyone. Thank you to everyone who contributed to the chat and the questions. I wish we could have gotten to every question, but there's just so much good information. We'll keep the conversation going with more programming like this. And yeah, reach out if you're in New York State and want to talk trades and building diversity in the trades. We'd love to talk with you. And thank you again to the panelists for this great conversation today.